Hey guys, I'm really happy to welcome back to the podcast Congressman Devin Nunes, California's 22nd District, a member of the Committee on Intelligence, also a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Last year he published the book Countdown to Socialism. Devin, welcome to the podcast. The last time you were on at the very beginning of my podcast, you made the forecast that you feared that the Biden administration was going to be, in effect, Obama's third term. Now, here we are, kind of 9-10 months in. Have your worst fears been realized?
I think so, and I think people are being able to see it in real time because it's quite clear that Biden is on a decline. Harris is clearly incompetent. And let me just take Biden first. Biden's much worse than what we thought. If you go back in time, remember that it was Obama who had basically handpicked Kamala Harris, who has been a political apparatchik out here in California. I'm talking to you from California right now. We have a kind of a Soviet style system out here, one party rule, complete socialists. Everybody sees the AOCs of the world because they get all the social media and national media attention. But our state legislature here is full of socialists, hard left-wing socialists, who have, it's really inundated the legislature over the last decade. And so Harris has been kind of at the top of that. She's always been hand selected to move up. She was elected to be a district attorney, then appointed basically as attorney general, U.S. senator. She was the party's nominee with really no opposition. And so when you have a state that's 65% left wing, she was easily elected. So she was never challenged. Obama, this has not been reported on a lot because I think it's kind of an embarrassing stain on the Obama regime. They hand selected her to be the heir apparent to Obama. They put in somewhere in excess of $100 million, and then she proceeded to have to drop out of the race before the first ballots were cast because it was going to be a complete embarrassment, a complete disaster. Now, they then had to go prop Biden up, weekend at Bernie style, to stop Bernie Sanders from becoming their nominee. And that's why everybody was always speculating who was going to be the vice president. I said from the very beginning, it's obvious who it's going to be. It's going to be Kamala Harris. So all of the folks that were involved in the Obama regime have now all been promoted, especially if you were a Russia hoaxer. You've been promoted even higher. So that's kind of where it stands, I guess, Dinesh, to answer your question. I don't think we ever expected Obama's third term, even myself, to be this obvious as to where the shots are being called from. And that's coming from Kalorama, which is a street in Washington, D.C., very famous for having huge mansions. And that's where Obama lives. And my guess is that's where most of the shots are being called from, the play call, so to speak.
Now, most presidents, as you know, typically ceremonially leave D.C. Bush, of course, went back to Texas, but that's been the pattern. But with Obama, he installs himself right near the White House, almost as if he was expected to be making a kind of regular contact with those guys. But with Obama, it seems to me that even when he would produce disastrous policies, the Bergdahl trade, the Iran nuclear deal, there was always a kind of slick sophistication, a sort of savoir-faire. He'd make sort of Jesuitical distinctions between ISIS and ISIL. So at the end, you were sort of confused. It was difficult to pin the blame entirely on him. I think with Biden and Harris, we're seeing something very different, which is to say, these are people who just walk right into it. They seem to get blown up, but then they seem to keep going with no sense that they are antagonizing valuable even Democratic constituencies. Where do you think they're heading with this brazen indifference to the impact of their policies?
Well, look, when you control your propaganda machine and you create a bubble in your country like many dictatorships do, or like the Chinese Communist Party does, it's no different than what we have seen here in California that's now went nationwide, where they control virtually all the content that gets created out there that you can find on by just doing a search. 95% really is what I calculate it to be. But then when you run that through what I call a disinformation funnel, which are the social media companies, the tech oligarchs, you end up really poisoning the American people. But at the same time, you create a bubble for yourself. So the difference really between Obama and the Biden-Harris regime is that Obama was always smooth talking. You can not like what he says, but he was very, very clever, able to kind of smooth talk. He looked presidential. He acted presidential. And he had that gravitas about him. And this is somebody who I disagree with completely, but you can't argue that the guy can give a good speech. With Biden, he made horrible decisions over the last 50 years that he's been in Washington, D.C. So this is no surprise. Remember, they had to, they did not want him to run. Just like I said earlier, they had to prop him up because he was the only choice they had at that point. And then, of course, with Harris, she's totally untested. And what you're beginning to see is if you have an apparatchik who's never had to actually do anything their entire career, and all of a sudden you're a U.S. senator, all of a sudden you're a vice presidential candidate, all of a sudden you're the vice president, you get cackles and no clue. I mean, even if she was going to take a real try at solving the border crisis or any of these crises, she's just incapable. And that's why you're starting to see the decay there in the White House. So now my guess is that you've got the top national security advisor, domestic policy advisor, essentially trying to keep Biden out of the White House. That's probably why they created this Hollywood type studio. You keep Harris out of the White House. Now they've had to bring in childhood actors for her to put around her to try to do a production because neither one can articulate any message beyond 5 to 10, 15 seconds, if even that. You can't even find a soundbite to plug in to their propaganda machine at this point.
Well, it must be slightly encouraging, Devin, because with all this, think of it, you've got this overwhelming media, right? One-sidedness. And then you've got the digital censorship on top of this. And even they can't protect Biden. Even so, his poll numbers are horrific, which shows that the American people are maybe a little smarter and able to sort of see through this fog of propaganda and disinformation coming from the tech giants themselves. Is that a sign of hopefulness as we look to the midterm?
Well, it's hopefulness, but at the same time, people's lives are being destroyed. This country, the fabric of this country is being ripped apart by these poisonous people. So these tech oligarchs are extremely dangerous, right? I mean, in terms of how they censored the last election, the information that was coming out from Hunter Biden's laptop to, for years now, censoring what conservatives put out on social media. That's why I went to Rumble. That's why you're on Rumble, because we had nowhere else to go. And then, of course, when Parler was propped up, then Bezos took it out by deplatforming. It's now back going again, but it's not nearly at where it was a year ago. And what they're effectively doing is they're taking down our ability to communicate. You can't win wars, whether they're in the battlefield or the war for ideas, if our side can't even communicate amongst ourselves. So yes, Rumble's great. It's a key component because it's a video platform, but we are still struggling with the Facebook and Twitter and all of that to try to get our message across, even to ourselves to communicate. So I'm optimistic, but at the end of the day here, Dinesh, you look at it and what they can't hide from is economic reality and international crises reality. So you end up with 13 dead warriors because of their stupidity, because the Chicoms and the Russians and Al-Qaeda, they're all very sophisticated about propaganda because they do it themselves. So you end up with 13 dead people. You can't hide from that. People falling from aircraft, you can't hide from that. Even the fake news couldn't ignore that. Then at the same time, like out here in California, you can only drive by and see $5 gasoline, store shelves empty, fires burning, and while they run around claiming global warming for everything. So this has become a cultist party. Essentially, their main cults are they're either worshiping the global warming gods, blaming everything on global warming and climate change, and if they're not doing that, they're calling everybody a white supremacist. That this is another type of cult. And if those two cults don't work, then they just blame the Russians and try to smear us with the Russian nonsense.
When we come back, I want to do a shorter segment with Devin Nunes. We're going to talk a little bit about his efforts to strike back at dishonest, intentionally lying media.